Good morning, and welcome to today's webinar, 9 Hyperion Myths That Are Making You Less Effective. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. Next slide, please. We've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop with the control panel in the upper right-hand corner. Next slide, please. You're listening in by using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Next slide, please. Oh, go back one. You will also have the opportunity to submit questions to our presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. In addition, we've also provided an APM product overview and a Hyperion white paper that you can access in the handout section of the control panel. Thanks, everyone. I'd now like to introduce Jonathan Berry, Chief Technology Officer at DataVale. Jonathan, you may begin.
Thanks, Jenna. Hi, everyone. This is Jonathan Berry from DataVale. We'll go into a little bit of background later, but just to remind everyone what we're talking about today, we're going to go over some of the 9 main myths around managing Hyperion Enterprise and how we debunk them. But first, let's talk a little bit about DataVale. So DataVale is a company that does professional services, managed services, data services, and now software. And we have over 600 DBAs, 300 clients, and we've been doing it for 13 years. Some of our capabilities around professional services are implementations and upgrades. We have a very mature managed services practice with 24/7 coverage, and data development services around optimizing data processes. And now DataVale offers software. So for those of you who are familiar with what was formerly Exceltis, it is now the DataVale Performance Management Platform. Today we're going to be talking about how we can apply it to owning and managing Hyperion to debunk those 9 main issues that we find, and we'll be doing it through things like automation and monitoring and proactive alerting, as well as performance testing. Okay. So a little bit about me, again, formerly from Hyperion and then Exceltis, founder of Exceltis, building performance management platform, primarily around owning and managing Hyperion or Oracle EPM, background in packaged software delivery. And now with DataVale, I have a role of CTO, but still running the Exceltis practice and still focused on delivering solutions for helping manage Hyperion solutions. Okay. So let's get right into it. So we're going to talk about the 9 main issues and situations that I'm sure everyone's encountered, at one point or another. And our goal is to establish that these don't have to be your realities and that there are ways that we can change your situation for the better. But I think everyone is going to be familiar with some or if not all of the items that we're talking about. So let's get into it. So the first one, and I think everyone's experienced this, is that reacting to things is really the only way to dig into issues, is that we deal with things after we've been notified of them. And the reason for this is that there's really few tools that are what we call truly proactive. There are a lot of tools that will say that they're proactive because they alert when a service goes down, but I think everyone in Hyperion knows that alerting when a service goes down is already too late. People have already experienced a problem. So that they only really know about it after the problem has occurred, and it's usually the end users who discover the problem and alert the Hyperion admin, which is not a great situation to be in if you're the person responsible for managing the system. You never want to be surprised, and you never want to be behind the gun to resolve the environment for the users. Okay, so there are ways around this, and through true proactive alerting, and having all sorts of key things that can trigger issues in the system, and through performance optimization. So knowing about what will happen before it happens. So for each one of these myths, we're going to establish kind of what the common thinking is, the ways that we can basically debunk it, and then we'll go through a case study where we'll talk about what that really means. Okay? So here we have a case where, let's put this out of the way, where we have a large manufacturing company that had an extremely large deployment and lots of users, and they continually got notified from users when there were issues. So again, they found out about it after the fact. So not only was a lot of time spent trying to resolve issues, but it was done in a very urgent manner because the system was already having problems, and the longer they waited, the more the more users that were impacted by it. So we installed the DataVeil software platform, which, for intents and purposes of this discussion, this would have been Exceltis, but that's now the DataVeil technology platform, and enabled proactive alerting, so that they were able to identify issues before they actually became problems. And I'll explain a little bit about what this means. So if we were just looking for service failures or for errors in logs or things like that, detecting them means that the problem has already happened. But the DataVeil technology platform, it leverages synthetic transactions. So we simulate user activity so that we can not only trigger when there is a hard failure, but we can trigger when there is a performance slowdown. So if performance problems or failures are preceded by periods of slow performance or even short periods of performance, these are things that we can identify before users even see it. And the end result in this case was, the MTTR, which is mean time to recovery, went from an average of about 43 minutes to about 8 minutes. And that's because we identified many problems before they were found. And for when issues were discovered, it was much quicker to find the solution and recover from them. Okay. So the next myth is that root cause analysis takes very large teams and many days to perform successfully. And really, the underlying reason for this, as we all know, is that Hyperion has a lot of moving parts across many tiers. And what does that mean? For those folks who have been around for a long time and remember Hyperion Enterprise, that was a product that could get installed on an administrator's desk and really require not a lot of support from anyone to maintain. Where the products today, there's web servers, there's networks involved, there's DBAs involved, there's lots of servers, there might be external storage. There's lots of things going on and lots of things that could cause a problem. And root cause analysis is really about getting all the information from different places into one place so decisions can be made. And that can be a real challenge when there's different owners of all these different technical roles. Okay? So getting it all together could take hours just for the turnaround time. So lots of people need to be involved, and just a lot of time is taken along the way. Okay? So what we do is we can change this by capturing data from all these different tiers and bringing it together in one place. So everything from what's happening on the network to the application layer, including authentication, to infrastructure as well as the database, all those different monitoring capabilities are in one place, and they're presented in a way that enable people to make decisions much more quickly. So now very small teams and even individuals have access to the data that would otherwise have taken a much larger contingent of people. Okay. So this is a great example. We had a client that is a large mining company. They have operations around the world with many remote users doing various things, some of them doing them from places where the connectivity was a little bit suspect. So there's lots of reasons why they might have had remote user problems. And we deployed what was then, Exceltis, and institutionalized a repeatable root cause analysis process. And what that means is that we were capturing data from all different tiers, from the network, from the app server, to the database and the web server, and got it together in one place. So they were able to experience much faster issue resolution, which ultimately results in better performance and happier users. And they even gave us a quote. So to quantify it, they said that remote user issues used to take them up to 3 days, and maybe 24 people had to be involved just to collect the relevant information for them to decide what to do next. But with Exceltis, they were able to get to the same point with one person in generally under an hour. And that wasn't magic. It's just a matter of having all the data in the right place, as opposed to a business person saying, hey, there's a remote user issue, could it be the network? And making a request to a network team and waiting for a 4 or 6 hour SLA, and then doing it again with the database team, only to have them come back and say, yeah, there's no issues here, where there might have been an issue, but it might no longer be an issue. So getting all the information in one place together is really what makes the difference, and that's what the Data Veil technology platform Exceltis is all about. Okay. Myth number 3 is that rebooting a system is an effective problem resolution. We used to have a panel on our website which had a finger on a reboot button, which basically said if you think if you think this is an effective way to fix your problem, you need to give us a call. It's kind of like the reboot and cross your fingers philosophy, I think, which is something that we've all done, but that doesn't have to be the normal course of action. And the challenge is that sometimes gathering, similar to the last myth, is that gathering the information can be really challenging. It takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of time, but sometimes even when you have all the information, being able to work through it to get to the root cause of an issue, really get to the source of it, can be challenging. And if you've done it a bunch of times and spent a lot of time and have not been successful at it, it's going to be more likely that you're going to address the symptom and reboot, and just hope that the next time it happens is a long way down the road. So legitimate reasons for getting into this scenario, based on history. But again, there's things that we can do about this. So Exceltis offers detailed root cause analysis capabilities, enabling a truly repeatable process. So it's something that can be done. It's easier to onboard, to train users, something that's repeatable. We can better pinpoint issues, and this is also partly because of what we just discussed. When we're monitoring different layers, it's much easier to rule things in or rule things out as the problem. So, knowing that we don't have to engage the network team because the problem is more systemic, that's a whole group of people and many hours that we don't need to be involved in. It gives us a much higher probability of getting closer to the problem. Okay? And then within the product, there's automated diagnostics, which are reports that can automate things that we would have otherwise done manually that could have taken hours or even sometimes days to do. So things like determining if servers are in sync, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that could take a long time. So having that automated, we can immediately rule things out so that we increase our probability of narrowing the problem space, which means that we can spend more of our time really focusing in on what could be the issue as opposed to ruling things out. And we do a lot of presentations purely on this topic, and we found that to be a methodology that all companies can truly have success with in the field. Okay. So moving along, the next one is that so case study, I apologize. So we had a client where they rebooted for all sorts of issues, and it was really because they were trained from history that whenever an issue occurred, the likelihood of finding the problem was so slim that the best way to get things back up and use what little resources they had, so they really couldn't, they had, full-time jobs, they really couldn't spare the time to invest in something that had a low probability of having success, so that they would reboot for pretty much any problem that they encountered. But with Exceltis in place, we're able to reconcile and connect symptoms to the source. So what they would have seen as systemic problems really turned out to be something that was more acute, and it had to do with financial reports. And when we were able to determine that, instead of rebooting the whole system, we connected it to some automation that would just restart the report services and then validate that reports are serving a good report. So it went from something that the whole environment would have to go down, a couple times a week. It went to just a few minutes because we weren't rebooting the whole system. We were just restarting that subsystem. So this was the first step in the process, and this was more remediation. It didn't fix the problem, but it greatly reduced the time where the system was unavailable, and ultimately reduced the number of users that were even aware that there was a problem, because with automated monitoring, detecting that there was slowness or a problem, it could automatically restart that subsystem. So the outage time went down, and the number of people that even were aware that there was an issue went down accordingly. So it was goodness. And then the next step in the process is to then go find the source of the problem and fix it. But along the way, we can just reduce the impact on the greater user community. Another one, this is that performance testing is expensive and complex. When I'm not talking about root cause analysis or monitoring, I do a lot of presentations on performance testing and the value that performance testing brings. And I am a huge proponent that when companies integrate performance testing as part of their daily life cycle, in the form of things like regression testing and things like that, that these are companies that have the best managed environments, and I've seen over and over again. So, but the challenge is that it can cost a lot of money, and it's not an easy thing to do without a tool that was built for it. So the reason for this, we know there's tools out there like LoadRunner. They require very specific and highly skilled resources, and they also take a lot of time. So you have to have the right resources. You have to have the right software, whether it's like LoadRunner or or JMeter or something like that, and they take time. So an interesting paradox here is that performance testing is designed to de-risk a project, and it's usually done toward the end of a project. So after the applications are built, we do performance testing to either validate that our environment will handle our user load, or maybe to determine what hardware we need to handle the user load that we expect. So there's a lot of reasons why we might do it. But then what happens is, if the application build out takes longer, but we're not able to change the go live date, what's the first thing that gets compressed? It's performance testing. And what's the first thing that gets removed? It's performance testing. So the fact that a lot of performance testing, aside from cost and resources, the fact that it might take a long time, a week or two or three, to perform, if we don't have the full-time performance, clients will often just kick it out altogether, which is really unfortunate, because it's designed that they're adding additional risk by removing the thing that was designed to de-risk the project in the first place. So this was a real problem that that we took on, and we addressed it head on. So what we offer in the area of performance testing, especially for Hyperion, is all the capabilities that you would get from a tool like LoadRunner, but we do in a way that you can get started in a matter of hours as opposed to days. And we accomplish that by delivering pre-recorded scripts. So all the things that you do like LoadRunner, which is, the first thing is you'd start out recording your user activity and parameterizing it. It might take 5 days or 7 days before you're even able to start running a test. But with what Datavail has to offer through Exceltis, we can get started literally in a matter of hours, because we've pre-recorded activities for every version of EPM. So we can just say, hey, we're going to run a test where we're going to, do form loads or report runs or, business calculations. So we've skipped that big first step. So we get started right away, which means we can get started in a matter of hours of what would take days or weeks, and we can complete in a matter of days, which would definitely take something weeks with like LoadRunner. The other thing we've done is we focus on actionable data. So we really designed performance testing to be put in the hands of not just specialists, but really everyone in the organization, from IT folks to business users. Okay, so that this is no longer realm of specially trained people, that everyone can take advantage of it. And we feel that the more companies take advantage of performance testing on a regular basis, the better off they're going to be. We also offer one more thing, which is one of the challenges with designing tests is that if you don't design a test that's representative of what your users are going to do, it kind of really doesn't matter what the results show. So if you're doing something that Hey, I sat around many rooms where we designed a test to say, we're going to have 50 users load data, then 20 users do consolidations, and then 150 users run reports. But at the end of the day, if that's not close to what the user community is going to do, then it really doesn't matter what the results show. It's just, you're doing it to check a box on a project plan. But with Exceltis, we have the capability to, through performance testing, replay history. So the ability to record what users have done in an environment and replay it, so you can get a much closer apples-to-apples view of how a consolidation or a financial close, let's say, what it would have looked like in an 11.124 environment based on how it went in an 11.123 environment, per se. Okay. So a good case study. So we had a client who was actually pretty progressive with performance testing. They knew that performance testing was beneficial beyond doing, the one-time load test. I call that the Big Bang theory, where we have a new environment, we're going to do a big test, and then we won't think about performance testing again for another, 2 years. But this company was actually really good about it. They did weekly and monthly regression tests. They compared results month over month, week over week. But they had a third-party load runner team that owned the scripts. So there was a business group, IT group, and then the load runner group. So they were very good about it, but every time that they wanted to make a change to the test, it would take 2 weeks before the change would get implemented and put back into production. But after the implementation of our performance testing, the business users took ownership of it. So the people who owned the business rules and the chart of accounts and these things took over doing performance testing, so they could run it whenever they wanted to. Their regression testing, they could run it off cycle if they became capable very quickly to make changes to the test, and it got very nuanced. And they also started using it in ways that they hadn't even considered before. So if they wanted to make a change to, let's say, a metadata hierarchy or even a business rule, it's easy enough for a single user to run a test to see how it will affect the system. But that's very different from what it would look like if 50 users are on the system, all running their little consolidations or loads. So they were able to now take performance testing and do a quick validation after adding more incremental metadata and rules changes. So it really changed the game for how they looked at it. And this was a company that actually started out being very good at how they leveraged performance testing. Okay, so myth number 5 is that you must be an EPM guru to manage an EPM system, right? So when I talk to people about Hyperion who aren't familiar with it, I have to explain that Hyperion is not a single entity. It's actually many products, and each one, either through the way it was built or through acquisition, kind of has its own administration capabilities. And this is changing over time, and things are getting a lot more aligned, but there's still a lot of things that are unique about each product. So each product has a lot of its own administration capabilities, log formats, configuration settings, so that there are people who are experts maybe in planning who don't know a lot about HFM. The same thing goes with OBIE or SBase, where even though they're all under the same Oracle EPM umbrella, they're all administered and managed in their own way, right? But there is a way around this. So through Datadale's Exceltis platform, things like property management, which is all the configuration, things like log access and application management, it's all available in a single console. So you can have one person that now can manage can do the basics of multiple applications, so not everything has to get requested of the the resident expert in each product. Okay. So a great example of this, we had a client who is a financial institution, and every time that there was an issue, and they had the whole suite of products, and I think they had OBIE as well, and all the kind of the sub-products, but every time that they needed help on any one of them, whether it was getting log data or if they needed to reconcile some configuration setting, they had to get a specific person who was the expert, who may or may not have been available at the time, to move the ball forward. But with our platform in place, a single person who was not the utmost expert in any of the products became capable to do all that first level stuff of getting all the relevant logs, getting any changes to configuration settings, all the things that someone would need to troubleshoot an issue could be done by someone who was not an expert. So that whole initial workload of gathering that information was now centralized, so that we only had to bring in the, again, the resident experts to, much further down the line. So it was a big time savings, big energy savings, and at the end of the day, a cost savings for them. Additionally, there is a summary report. We call it the summary report. It's basically auto documentation of all the settings across all products. So, things like HFM tuning settings versus, which exist in various versions in the registry or someplace else. Planning application settings are in the database. S-base config settings are in a flat file. To document all of these things takes a lot of knowledge of where they exist, and a lot of effort to go through and capture them and get them into a single place. With our platform, this is something that we can do on day one. We can run the summary report, and it's going to auto-document the entire environment. So you can get it in an Excel file, in an HTML file, or a PDF file, a snapshot in time of the environment. So something that would have taken a great deal of expertise, can now be done automatically. Okay. Myth number 6: administrators spending time in the urgent versus important category. So everyone has their full-time jobs. Very few, people came on to manage the infrastructure of Hyperion, and everyone really wants to spend their time pushing the business forward, right? So we want to spend time on the important, but like everyone, we do spend a lot of time on the, on the urgent. And that's because we're, dealing with the issue of the day. There's a lot of tasks that, that are manual. They're not automated, so we're doing the same thing over and over. Because, good automation tools aren't available. There's bits and pieces here and there. People will spend time building scripts to try to do automation, and they need to be maintained and redone, on new versions. But again, this is, very core to what we do with the Datavail Exceltis platform, is that we can give time back to administrators who are really meant to be doing more high-value work for the business. So with proactive monitoring in place, we can get ahead of issues before users find them. Manual tasks can be automated with our automation capability. We'll talk a little bit more about this. The whole root cause analysis process is streamlined, so something that could have taken, days can now take hours. And at the end of the day, it's really about getting admins to spend the time more on the important, and because the urgent is handled, automatically. So this is a good example that comes down to a case of automation. We had a client who, on a monthly basis, they would do a 5-year consolidation in HFM. And it took 40 person-hours of a CPA's time, and that's because they had to unlock all the periods. They had to run a series of consolidations and, wait for them to finish before running the next one. And then when they were done, they'd have to relock the periods again. But with our automation capability, the entire process was automated and ultimately scheduled. So it went from being 40 hours to something that could be done with a click of a button, and then to something that was scheduled for a convenient time. So it really went from 40 hours down to 0 because it got scheduled. And if there were any issues, they would have been alerted to a report. So basically anything that's currently a manual process that you can imagine can be automated through the Datavail Exceltis platform. Okay. Myth number 7, so conflict between IT and finance is unavoidable. So let me step back and kind of explain one of the reasons why Exceltis was originally founded was because of this challenge. So for a little bit of history, I was responsible for the HFM development team for some time and was there in the very early days when clients had issues. I was involved in helping them troubleshoot it. And all clients had a large investment in various tools and technologies and things like that. But none of them were very helpful in helping the Hyperion products. So what we had a world where business administrators were dependent on many other teams to help them support the business applications. And what I had found is, I spent my weekends helping people try to figure out their systems, and the tools that they had weren't very helpful. So I knew that there had to be a better way. So, you know, very intentional. And also to note that there's multiple teams, and ultimately they all have to support the business application, but not everyone really understood. People who are supporting the application on the DBA side, on the network side, or on the infrastructure side aren't always knowledgeable, nor maybe should they be, of how the business application works. And the nature of Hyperion is that you often can't treat the database as you would in a typical DBA scenario, just because it's less transactional, more analytical. So it's just a different beast altogether. So tools they have generally aren't helpful. So there's a lot of interdependency among these teams. Okay, and ultimately a lot of finger pointing and things like that. So what we did was we really targeted all of the monitoring and analysis to really walk right down the middle and give all the teams involved a single set of quantifiable data, so that by looking more broadly at what gets monitored, where certain tools might have been focused on the IT user or some on the business user, really try to provide a set of data that kind of bridged that gap, so that we changed the conversation from being a business user requesting information from a network person about whether there's any nuances or anything going on in the network. So instead of asking questions, more about saying, hey, look, we have data suggesting that there was some type of anomaly. So instead of saying, is there a problem, the business person can say, there is a problem, help me figure out what's causing it so we can get past it. And at the end of the day, having one set of quantifiable data is good for everyone. So that was really one of the founding premises of the platform to begin with. And you know, one of our case studies is we have an international bank where whenever a business process would fail, and that could be slow performance of a form, it could be something like Smart View or some type of dashboard, or even a business calc would fail, the first reaction would be to go to these supporting teams, which could have been the IT, could be network, and it could be DBA teams. Just because, as we discussed before, there's so many moving parts, there's so many things that could affect the performance of that rule or the delivery of that form going back to the client's browser, right? So the challenge here is they have to go to all these teams, wait for turnarounds, and then it's the coordination of all this information. But with the Databell Celtics platform, it changed the conversation from requesting information with these open-ended questions of, is there a problem, to going back and saying, look, there is a problem. As a business person, you might not know what a trace route is, but if you can go to the network team and say, the trace route has changed over the last week, and now we're experiencing bad performance with our remote with our remote users, that's a quantifiable thing that someone can act on. So it's all about changing the conversation, and ultimately the SLA times improve, the availability improves, and the finger pointing is dramatically reduced because all the teams are working together with one set of data. Moving along. So another big one is just the complexity of managing multiple environments. So it's typical to have a QA in prod, or dev tests in prod, or maybe even a DR environment. And often things like the two top environments, so prod, and whether it's test or QA, we try to keep them in sync, and we always will go back to comparing one to the other. And if it's good in QE, it should be good in prod, and if we're not seeing that, we're always scratching our heads as to why are we seeing different performance if we spend all this time and money trying to make these things the same. And what we learned over many years is that some of the most troubling problems and the hardest to find, and ultimately, and once you find the problem, they're easy to fix, but the hardest ones to find aren't necessarily issues with like resource contention or things like that. They're issues with configuration, and it's where things are out of sync, and maybe it's multiple planning servers have different JVM settings, or multiple HFM servers have different memory settings, or settings between environments are different, or maybe a particular DLL that got patched on one environment or one server didn't get patched on the other. These are the types of problems that are intermittent, meaning you can't reproduce it all the time. Every now and then it gets a little bit wacky, and it's because things are out of sync. And it's really troubling with comparing production to QA because there are so many things to look at and track down. And as we discussed before, just the documentation of what all the settings are could be a huge job. We have some benchmarks on even a simple Hyperion 11124 environment of S-based planning and HFM, with all the core products, has over 20,000 unique configuration settings on any given server, provided that a bunch of the products are installed on one server. So that is just a lot to track, and there are different places. So if you're starting out with an intermittent issue and your task is to go see what's different, that can be really problematic, and that's at the configuration level or at the application level. So real problem, people see it all the time, and it's one of those things that's almost a non-starter when going in to troubleshoot it because the job is so big. Okay, right? But this is how we can debunk that and really change the game, is that right out of the box we offer, and I mentioned this before, auto documentation. So the ability to take a snapshot of everything that exists on every server. Then we can do synchronization across servers. So you have multiple planning servers. Are all of these settings the same, right? Are our JVM settings the same? Are our application settings the same? Knowing that if anything is out of sync, it could cause us all sorts of really hard to troubleshoot problems. We can then look across environments. So we have a QE and prod environment. And not everyone keeps them in sync, but many companies will spend quite a bit of effort and money to have this either, from the hardware up, or at least just the applications and data synchronized, because they want to have an environment that they can test in, and they want to be representative of what it's going to look like in production. Okay? And we also offer the ability to have the automated change history. So it's one thing to go in and say, hey, are things in sync today? Give me a documentation showing me the snapshot today. But what we also offer is the ability to automatically detect changes as they happen, and that's whether it's a configuration change or an application change, like a change to an S-based calc or outline or an HFM rule, and being able to have a record of it so that you can look between any 2 points in time and say, what has changed over time? Oh, this business rule changed. We changed a memory setting here, and be able to say, what did my system look like on this date? And in doing so, we can then say, hey, if we're starting out where QA and prod are synchronized, we should be able to very quickly go back and say, hey, no, performance is not the same anymore. Let's go take a look at the change history and see whether any of the key things that could affect performance have deviated, maybe intentionally or unintentionally. So that's all their basic out-of-the-box functionality. And we had a client that we're doing some work with, and they could not determine, basically they were doing an upgrade, and they went from, and this is going back a little bit, but they were going to an environment where they were getting all new hardware, and with the new software version, they assumed that all the performance would be better overall on both QE and prod environments. And what they found is that a group of reports, and actually what they found is not a group of reports, they found that some reports, they hadn't put a pattern together yet, were not performing very well in production. The problem was they had over 1,000 reports, which is a story in itself. But what we did was we did an environment compare report, and what we found was that within the financial report definitions, a handful of them, people had been modifying the production version of the report where they were adding member lists down the down the rows of the reports. So even though there was a set of reports that had the same names in both environments, and on the surface they looked the same, the production of the report was actually grabbing a lot more data than the one that was in QE. And the challenge is, without having an automated way of detecting differences, over time they probably would have discovered all of the reports, but it would have been a user running it, questioning it, reporting it, and then them adding it to the list and doing some manual changes, where this was able to automatically go in and have a traffic lighted report that showed, hey, 5 out of the 1,000 are different. And then they were able to go in and look at them specifically and determine, someone's been making changes to the report definition. But so it can be used in a number of ways, keep things in sync, root cause analysis, tracking changes. It's just something that can be very cumbersome to do manually. It's something that we can do in an automated way. Okay. And myth number 9, SOX audit requests are time consuming. So we use the term SOX in the context of Sarbanes-Oxley. We also have another term that we just call change audit. So in the early days, we had a module called the SOX module, which is really focused around things related to Sarbanes-Oxley. But over time, it expanded to things that were much broader. Now it really covers any type tracking changes to really any type of file or artifact. But at the end of the day, it is time consuming if you're doing, your SOX tracking or any type of change audit tracking manually. Okay? Because and actually there's a couple of real problems with this is, let's say that you have an internal auditor or an external auditor, or let's say you're just doing it because for good practice and you want to keep track of what's going into the system. Even if you're using something like DRM is pushing the changes out, it's still good to audit on the back end what made it into the system. So what usually happens is the people who are doing the loads are the same people who are providing information to the auditors on a quarterly basis of what's been done. And they're usually looking through logs, say, oh, look, a load happened on this date and this time. This is the file that I think I loaded. There's another load at this time. This is the file that I think I loaded. Let's do a current extract. Let's provide it to the auditors. So there's a lot that is, prone to error because it's a human reconciling what they think they did, looking through logs which may or may not have been trimmed, gathering files which may or may not really be the right file that was loaded. So it takes a lot of time and is very error prone, and at the end of the day, auditors generally are really looking for something that's called an objective way of doing the auditing. They really prefer not to have the person who's doing the load as the same person who's giving them the report of what was done if possible. Okay, just takes a lot of time if people try to do it at all, and it's very error prone along the way. Okay, but with the Datavail Exceltis platform, this can all be automated. So I mentioned before about the ability to automatically detect and track changes, and this is for configuration changes or for application elements. So we can decide that we want to track changes to, business rules, S-based calcs, form definitions, metadata files, these sorts of things. Or it could be really any arbitrary file on the system. We can audit it, and we'll look for changes, and when we detect that something has changed, we'll take a snapshot of it. So you can go back and have a whole version history of how that artifact or application element changed over time. Okay. So we had a client where, and this is probably familiar to anyone who does auditing, this is probably, this is definitely not unique, where they had a person who spent, about 1 week a quarter preparing for the auditor's report. And the things that they had to do, so this was primarily more of a SOX environment, so this was an HFM system. So they had to do all the rules, the metadata, and report definitions. And they would go through and look through the logs and see what was loaded, and when, and they go through the reports table to see when the last report, or what, when the report load happened. They do the extracts and they prepare all the changes. But the auditors didn't like it because it was still a manual process. It was very error prone, and there was really no way to have an objective view of what had happened over that period of time. Okay? But with the Exceltis system in place, all those changes were automatically detected, and then a snapshot was taken, so that we didn't just do endpoint to endpoint, but we could see through time how things occurred. So, and then a change report, again previously called a SOX report, now it's just called a change report, was generated once a quarter and then handed to the auditor. So it would show what has occurred between the first, between the last quarter and the last day of this quarter. Ultimately, relieving the person who's doing the work of doing any manual effort because the change report will generate everything that they were doing manually. And in addition to that, the snapshots are available in the repository, which means that if any time, and this is true for auditing as well as troubleshooting, if at any point they want to see what a certain component looked like at any given date, they could go back, and if they wanted to do a rollback, they could extract it out of the repository and perform a rollback. So it helped not only with incremental changes, but they would have the whole snapshot of that application available to them. So this is something that can be automated if you're spending manual time on it, and maybe more importantly, it's an objective process which auditors typically are looking for, which is not really available today. And like I said, this is not just a finite set of things that's in Hyperion. It's really any type of system artifact can be audited for changes over time. Okay. So those are the 9 minutes, and hopefully, it resonated on how leveraging the Datavail Exceltis platform, we can debunk it and change it for you. Here's just a couple of screenshots of some of our functionality. Just to note that some things are available in alerts and dashboards and reports, and then other things are interactive tools. So it's one thing to know that something's happening, but there's other capabilities that let you really jump in and drill in to get into more detail. And depending on, of the various scenarios we discussed, some or all of these are leveraged, whether it's automation, whether it's proactive alerting, whether it's root cause analysis. It's a combination of these capabilities that, allow our clients to get past the issues that we discussed. Okay. Now we're going to open it up for Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. We're now going to begin answering questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jane with our first question.
Thank you, Jenna. Okay, Jonathan. Question number 1, what is meant by repeatable RCA process?
Okay, so yes, I mentioned repeatable, root cause analysis process. Once you're right, it's a good question. It's actually something I could, of the things I like to talk about, I could probably talk about it all day long. It comes down to having a set of steps, and we try to take a really holistic view of it and take, Datavail Exceltis, take it out of the picture, and let's just think about what we do as Hyperion admins to address issues. And there's always a set of things that we do, and traditionally, we look at the easy stuff first. So we're going to see whether there's errors in logs, whether there's resource contention. And if we don't find the answer there, it's typical to work to the harder things, to say, oh boy, there's nothing obvious here. Maybe my problem is related to my servers being out of sync. And people don't like to get there because they know it's going to take hours or days to go down that path. So the repeatable process is part of what we call the COE, Center of Excellence methodology on which Exceltis was built. And it really stems from the premise of having automated capabilities to do a lot of that hard work first. So we kind of take what people would traditionally use as a root cause analysis process, and we kind of flip it on its head. So instead of doing the easy stuff first, we use the automated capabilities to rule out all the hard stuff. So the last thing you'd likely do as an admin is check whether your servers or environments are out of sync. That's actually the first thing you do in Exceltis, because you have an automated capability and report that will tell you that. So you can basically rule that out. And it's all about taking what I call the problem space, which are all the various things that could ultimately be the source of an issue, and slicing and dicing it and ruling it out. So what you're left with is a much more narrow space, a finite set of things that you can look at. And this is true whether you're using Exceltis or not. It's just Exceltis was built to automate all these things that you'd otherwise do manually. So it's tough to do it on your own. But with the platform, we streamline the process so it becomes something that is repeatable, that's no longer this tribal knowledge thing, and something that is helpful to onboard people. That's something that different folks on the team can all perform. So hopefully that answered the question, but if anyone wants to talk about that in more detail, you'll have my email and phone. I'm happy to discuss with you both how it applies to Exceltis or just doing it on your own, just developing a best practice that, that eliminates the need for all this tribal knowledge that everyone, currently uses.
Okay. Next question. Does your software work on any Hyperion version or Hyperion application?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. I mean, we support, all Oracle EPM, going back to, I haven't seen anyone on 9 in a while, but certainly 11, .1, 11.124 patch, whatever, on back. And, all the products, so the S-Base, OBIE, planning, HFM, reports, we're adding functionality for some of the other products, but really any Oracle EPM product. At the end of the day, Exceltis really supports any enterprise software. It's just that we have some special capabilities for some of the Hyperion products. So the answer is yes, and it just depends on the specific product and what's needed to manage and monitor that product will determine what we've built into Exceltis. But yes, anything in Oracle EPM we can deploy Datavale Exceltis against and set up an environment for monitoring and managing that application.
Okay, great. Last question. We know we need to do some performance testing, but we're not sure what kind of performance testing we need to do. Is that something you can help us identify?
Yes, so we do a great deal of performance testing. It's a kind of one of the pillars of our business, and it's always good when people acknowledge that maybe they're not sure what they should do. I actually take that as a great sign because, there's different reasons why we might want to do performance testing, and depending on what we're trying to accomplish, will determine how we proceed. So absolutely, feel free to give me a call or email me. We can have that conversation, and what we would come out of it is, and whether you actually use Exceltis or LoadRunner, the approach needs to be determined first, and we can determine an approach and what it would take to do with, with our people and the Exceltis tool set. But yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation, and we do this quite a bit, so we have a lot of experience and success in that area.
Awesome. I just moved over to the contact slide so that everyone can see your contact information. Janelle, we'll turn it back over to you. That's all the questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks, Jane. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for attending our webinar today, and on behalf of Datavale, have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.